Hello, everyone. I'm Amy, the founder and executive director of the LBJ Women's Campaign School. Welcome to today's event, the She-cession and the future of female work. I am honored to be today's moderator. The last century saw women gaining more control of American household spending, entering the workforce, and helping to fuel the rise of the service sector, including healthcare, education, and retail. But in January, women's participation in the labor force hit a 33-year low, and women of color have been hit the hardest as they are leaving the workforce at twice the rate of white women. This underlines the enormous burden of both racism and sexism that women of color face. We are living through our nation's first female-driven recession, fueled by disappearing service sector jobs and a lack of childcare options. The COVID-19 public health and economic crisis has triggered the nationwide She-cession that exposed and deepened existing inequalities in our workforce. But as we work to rebuild our economy, and we also face an unprecedented opportunity to address structural inequalities head on. The future will depend on whether we are able to rise to this challenge and allow women, especially women of color who were hit the hardest by this pandemic and by the She-cession, to thrive. If you have questions for today's panelists, please use the Q&A function. And at this time, it is my pleasure to introduce today's panelists. We have Gaddis, founder of T3 and its White House recognized Bring Your Baby to Work program. Dr. Victoria De Francesco Soto, Assistant Dean for Civic Engagement at the LBJ School and author of a recent study on the She-cession and COVID-19. Shauna Bartley, Director of Community Partnerships for Income Security and Child Care Early Learning at the National Women's Law Center, and Karen Harris, Chairwoman of the Texas Governor's Commission for Women. I'm going to start today's panel with a question for Gay. A recent McKinsey & Company study found that women, especially women of color, have been negatively impacted by COVID-19 more than their male counterparts. Not only are they more likely to be laid off, but they are carrying the load in parenting, homeschooling, and taking care of their family. Gay, can you tell us a little bit about the program you built at T3 to retain female employees at your company?
Yes, I'm very excited to tell you about this because it's an old story, but it's still a new story. And that is about 25 years ago when I was growing my company T3, the advertising agency, I had 4 women who got pregnant very close to the same time. And one by one, they came to announce their very happy news to me. But inside, I was gripped by the fact that I was scared I would lose them. And what if they didn't come back to work? I knew 2 of them didn't have to work. You know, they had security, and the other 2 were iffy. And they were very key on my team, building business with me. And so we were called a think tank. T3 is the think tank. And I said, what am I going to do with this? So I put my own think tank cap on and thought, what if they just brought their children with them to work? What if they brought the babies with them? Well, no one had heard of such a thing. And so I asked them if they would try it, and they were very hesitant, very reluctant. They didn't know if it would how in the world would it work? And one thing led to another. I did convince them. We gave it a try, and it had its ups and downs, but it did work. And through the years, we developed a policy. It became part of the culture of the company that we invited parents, both men and women, to bring their infants in to work with them until a certain point. This wasn't long-term daycare, and it wasn't a certified daycare. The parents took care of the children, and the staff really kind of surrounded them with support. So by the time that I sold my company T3, we'd had about 120 children come through this program, and it was incredibly successful. It still goes on today. I was recognized by Bill Clinton's White House for family-friendly policies. We were on the Today Show numerous times, ABC Nightline, USA Today, New York Times. So the program was widely promoted. However, I have to say that it's been difficult for me to watch because not very many people have adopted these types of programs. And I think there's concern about, well, once you let the cat out of the bag, what will they want next? But it does work. And it really has an upside that I would love to talk more about, but I won't. But there's a very big upside to the development of the child as well. And that is that we saw that our children that came through this program, who were being cared for, talked to, and encouraged by other adults, actually went into the school system with a higher literacy rate. They were really good students, and almost all of them have excelled. And I've watched one of them. I just went to one of them's wedding recently, and we all had our mask on, and I wouldn't have missed it for the world. She was our first T3 and under babies. We called it the T3 and under program. So I encourage people to think about programs like this because women need the support. It's very difficult. I'm a mom of 3. It's very difficult to come back into the workforce right after a newborn is on the ground because you're feeling so frightened, and guilty, and there's all the things that go along with being a new mom. So these programs or anything we can do to lend a hand to women to keep them in there will then pay off in the long haul.
This sounds like an amazing program, especially now in a time when childcare is one of the biggest barriers that women face. We've seen that 2.5 million women have left the workforce compared to 1.8 million men, and childcare is certainly one of these issues. And it's not just about employees, it's also about women-owned businesses. And so I'd like to actually talk a little bit about the program that you're starting at McCombs, Gay, for entrepreneurship. And so if you could talk a little bit about women-owned businesses have actually been hit a lot harder in the pandemic as well. So can you talk a little bit about that program and also about women entrepreneurs during this time?
Well, I'm very excited to announce something. You're one of the first to hear about it. We're officially launching it this week or end of week. I'm partnering with another woman who has been a corporate leader and giant. She and I have both been named by McCombs in their Business Hall of Fame awardees. And so we partnered together with the executive leadership program at the University of Texas McCombs School of Business. And this fall, we will launch a 6-month program that will be targeted to women who have been in the workforce 5 years or more. They've already shown leadership skills. They can be entrepreneur or they can be corporate. We will want to combine those. And in this program, I come at it from an entrepreneur standpoint. My partner, Lynn Utter, comes at it from a corporate standpoint. And we will give real world, roll up your sleeves advice, techniques, and ideas on how to take that next step up. And we're doing this for the very reason that we just talked about. Women have been hit particularly hard right now. Women who are on their way on a track to leadership or are already doing that have been kicked back. Some are out, some are not, say, I can't do it. So we're there with the lifeboat saying, come on, we know you can do it, and we're going to help you get through this. When the women complete the program, there will be up to 50 that we will include in our program. When they are finished with this, they will have a certificate, they will have a network, and we're hoping to keep them connected because that is the secret to keeping women in the workforce, to have a safety net, a connection, other people they can talk to, and a group that will encourage them. to take those next steps, because we can't lose these amazing women. I mean, they've already come so far, and now to lose them and take 3 steps back is just the wrong direction. So we're very, very excited about our program, and you can find out about it. If you want to sign up for my newsletter, you can see it in the chat, and I would love for you all to spread the word to nominate women or to nominate yourself for this program. But if you sign up for my newsletter, I'll put all the information in it next week. On Tuesday, you'll get this, and you can find out all about it. But thanks for asking. I'm very thrilled about it.
Well, what an incredible opportunity for women in leadership, women in business, women entrepreneurs. And this leads me into a question that I have for Chairwoman Harris. Chairwoman Harris, I'm wondering what steps need to be taken to achieve the goal of making Texas the #1 state for women-owned businesses. What would that look like? And share a little bit about what the commission that you're on is doing.
I'm so glad you asked that question because I'm happy to say that we have already been named the #1 state in the nation for women entrepreneurs. Over the last 4 years or so, we've not only been named #1, but we've never fallen below #5 in any category for women entrepreneurs. I'm really proud of that. And when I came on as chair of the Women's Commission, the governor tasked us, the commission, with helping him to keep Texas the #1 state in the nation for women to do business. So that is something that we are very passionate about, and I'm happy to report that we've done that. One of the reasons that we've been able to do that is because Texas is a state that is considered to be a low tax state. We're considered to be a low tort state, meaning that we are friendly towards those that are undergoing litigation or might be involved in litigation. And we are also a state that has very good, I think I might have mentioned, property taxes and payroll taxes or business taxes. Those things are important when you are planning to open a business, because you have to consider the cost of doing business. It's not just about your idea and how am I going to get my idea across, but when we have entrepreneurs that are thinking about where their workforce, they have to consider things like where my employees are going to live. They have to consider how much the housing costs are going to be, because of course they have to pay their workers accordingly. But again, I'm really pleased and I'm happy that Texas is such a great state for female entrepreneurs. I suppose that in so doing, answering this question, I would also like to share that we are also the #1 state in the nation for jobs created by African American women. We are the #1 state in the nation for jobs created by Hispanic women and veteran women businesses also. So we are doing better than most other states in the nation. And I realize that today's webinar is going to be seen by people all over the nation and perhaps even in other countries. We're happy to have you in Texas if you're thinking about relocating. I've seen some signs that say Texas is full, but we're always open for business. Texas also, I thought, was a really interesting stat. Texas is home to 50 of the 500, the Fortune 500 companies' headquarters. So we are doing quite well. We're doing quite well. So I think the future looks good for Texas and looks good for Texas women in particular. There's one other thing that I would like to mention, and that has to do with small businesses in particular. 9 out of 10, I think is the stat, small businesses in Texas are small businesses. So though we love having big business here in Texas, small business is still the key to Texas production in the workplace, and it is still the key to our success. Small business is the key to our success. 9 out of 10 businesses are small, and they employ more than half of the workforce in the state. So these things are important. They're important for Texas in general, but they're particularly important for Texas women. So I hope that answered your question.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. And I'd like to turn our attention back to this question around childcare, because as we're talking about women-owned businesses and the success of women-owned businesses, we know that one of the most important things to support women-owned businesses and women in the workplace has to do with childcare. And the House and Senate just passed the COVID relief bill that has $39 billion allocated to save the childcare industry. So I would love to hear from Shauna and Dr. DeFrancesco Soto about what this means for working women.
Yes, I'm happy to kick off and then pass to my colleague. So this bill is super exciting because it has included an unprecedented and long overdue investment in childcare. It's so necessary that this bill gets signed into law because we know that the decimation of our childcare sector will stunt our economic recovery and erode women's and families' financial security now and in the long term. Without access to high quality and affordable childcare, people generally and women in particular will be unable to return to work or train for new careers as the pandemic subsides and we start thinking about reopening our economy. And what we know is that the pandemic has only increased challenges for childcare programs, many of which prior to the crisis operated on razor thin margins. And as we think about women-owned businesses and women entrepreneurs, childcare programs, especially those based in homes, are small businesses led by women who are sole proprietors. So we often kind of create this dichotomy, but these women are also women business owners. And what we know is that through analysis from the Center for American Progress, many of our childcare providers on average are facing a 47% increase in operating costs during the pandemic because they have to keep their program sizes smaller. They need more resources, supplies, and personal protective equipment in order to serve kids and families safely. And just by virtue of the fact that the numbers enrolled in their programs are shrinking in order to keep folks safe, they're having to navigate an uncertain financial future. And what has this really meant for many of them? According to a survey conducted by our partners at the National Association for the Education of Young Children, they completed the survey in December 2020, so this is pretty current information. 56% of childcare programs said that they are losing money every day that they remain open. And in order to remain open, they're accruing debt on their personal credit cards. They're dipping into their own personal savings, and many are being forced to furlough or take pay cuts, and in the worst cases, lay off some of their workforce. So I'll kind of wrap this up and say, this investment totals, that's 39 billion, builds on 10 billion we saw in the December package and 3.5 billion we saw last year in the spring, to reach over $50 billion, an unprecedented amount of money, a historic investment in this sector that is the lifeline for our families and our entire economy. And it's so important that we get immediate and targeted relief to childcare and early learning programs across the country for all of the reasons that my colleagues have mentioned, so that women can go to work, they can run their own businesses. These women are also business owners, and we're really, it's both exciting because we're able to invest in a new way, but also a little alarming because we lost so much during this very short time period. And with that, I will pass to my colleague.
Thanks, Shauna. So I want to provide a little bit of historical context and weave in a number of these threads that my colleagues have put forward. And the first is that, the idea of supporting women in the workforce is not new. So during World War II, when all of our men were over in the European theater, and all of the women had to go to work in factories to support the war effort. We saw a bill, actually an executive action, excuse me, that funded essentially universal childcare. Universal childcare that was 7 days a week, that was at nights, that was during the day, that provided meals for kids. So these ideas about having robust childcare are not new. We just need to dust them off, because we saw that during the wartime effort, when there was a recognition that we desperately needed women to be engaged in the workforce, effectively supporting women so that they could support the war effort, the American public, society, we gave support to those children. So I always want us to have that historical marker when we're talking about that. Regrettably, once the war effort ended and all the husbands came back, we kind of went, back to how things were. We went back to the 1950s, the more traditional way of our families. As we saw women in the 1960s and the 1970s start to enter the workforce, at a slow but steady pace, we didn't see the support keep pace with them. So I think that's what's so frustrating. We know that we can do it, but then when women slowly were entering, that wasn't happening. So, prior to the COVID pandemic, we were living in a crisis. What the COVID pandemic did is it made folks who aren't parents, or maybe who aren't the active parents in organizing childcare, realize, oh my God, we have a drastic problem. But the fact of the matter is that we were functioning on rickety infrastructure to begin with. So the two main problems were affordability and accessibility. So it costs about the same to send your kid to college for a year than it does to send them to daycare when they're a baby. That is ridiculous. That is nonsensical, and that is not supportive of women in the workforce. And the second issue that affects everyone, regardless of SES, is accessibility. I think, even women who are in the higher SES bracket will tell you, I'm on a waiting list for years to get my child into daycare. So what the silver lining of the pandemic for childcare is that it has really shown a light on how broken our system is, and the stimulus money that is coming to fund the child care centers that are like falling behind and struggling is a Band-Aid. But what I push all of us to think about is, how do we reimagine a child care system that supports women in the 21st century? We are working outside of the home. My hope is that once we get past the She-cession, women are back up to their labor rates prior to the pandemic, and we continue to grow. So that key piece is childcare. How do we reimagine it? Again, the stimulus money is great to stabilize the childcare centers and the programs that we're suffering, but that's not the solution. We need to reimagine the solution as stakeholders, as policy folks, as women who are lucky enough to have a seat at the table.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. I love that you bring up the national response that happened during a time of crisis of World War II. And right now is a similar time of crisis that demands a similar national response. And something that I saw happening earlier this year is that 50 women leaders stepped up and demanded a Marshall Plan for moms that was reported on in the New York Times. And then Congresswoman Grace Meng actually wrote a resolution in the House that is called the Marshall Plan for Moms. And so my follow-up question to you here is, what would you have liked to see in this bill that maybe isn't there, or what kind of policies should we be thinking about for the future as we move forward in this response? And of course, Vicki, you can answer this, but Shauna, I would love to hear your perspective on this as well.
I'm just going to add one little thing that before passing off to Shauna and the rest of the panel. I think we need to think about childcare more broadly. We absolutely need funding for pre-K3, pre-K4, all those programs, infant care, but we also need to think about maternity leave for our American women, because it is embarrassing how we stack up to our counterparts, our G8 counterparts, our developed economies that do provide maternity leave, because maternity leave is a form of childcare and it benefits all, right? You are able to have that strong relationship with your child. They're able to develop more strongly. There's not that economic pressure of having to go back to work because you have that support system. So my one addition to thinking about childcare is not just the programmatic vision, but how do we support maternity leave and by extension, paternity leave, or whatever family structure is supporting that child that has come into their lives.
And I would just add on to Vicki's comments, which I think are so spot on, is something that is increasingly happening to more and more women that we're referring to as the sandwich generation, which is, yes, definitely a Marshall Plan for moms. But what we're finding is those same women who are caring for young children are also having to care for elderly relatives or other relatives living with disabilities. And so what we also want to be driving is this idea that care is part of our infrastructure. It is just as essential as a road or a bridge to getting to work, just as necessary as our emergency services and supports, right? We know that care for our elders, care for folks with disabilities, care for our children is the bedrock of our economy, because it allows us to then be able to contribute to other things in our communities, whatever our jobs may be, whatever our businesses may be. And so certainly a Marshall Plan for moms, but what we also need is a broad understanding of what caregiving is. So for a lot of us, we are starting to think about what would it take to really build the care infrastructure needed for our economy, bringing in paid family and medical leave, paid sick days, thinking about long-term services and supports in both a community-based setting and at home, childcare for our kids, which recognizes the full spectrum of care providers, family, friend, and neighbor care providers, home-based providers, early educators, and center-based programs. This is when we start to think about what we've learned through this awful crisis where we've lost so many folks. We are more aware, and we're taking these very quiet kitchen table conversations and now having them in a very public and honest way about what we really need. What does it take for our communities to go, for our kids to learn, for our elders to age in place or age in environments that are supportive of them, for folks living with disabilities to have access to the supports they need, and for their caregivers to feel supported and valued and affirmed. The amount of paid and unpaid caregiving that happens every day is what allows us to do everything else in this country. And so that's the work that I see, in addition to some of the great things in the Marshall Plan for moms, is that broader care as infrastructure need that we have.
Thank you so much. And I'd love to build on what we've been talking about a little bit. We've been talking primarily about women in business, in the business sector, but it's also important to talk about women in government and in the public sector as well. And so I'm curious to ask Chairwoman Harris what she's been thinking about in terms of women in the government sector. And something that happened yesterday, actually, yesterday was International Women's Day. President Joe Biden signed an executive order creating the Gender Policy Council. And this council will report directly to him and requires the participation of every cabinet secretary. And by the way, we have a very diverse cabinet secretary, very diverse cabinet with this administration, with many women being involved, but now every cabinet secretary will be required to participate in this. What might these things mean for women in the public sector and women in government?
I am not very familiar with the executive order that the president signed on yesterday, but I will say women in government and women in business parallel. A lot of the same challenges that a woman has in business, she will have if she is trying to forge her way into the government sector. I've also found that one of the greatest obstacles to either is access to capital. and the opportunity to be mentored by someone that is already doing what you want to do. What I found as I've talked with women all over the state, they are not so much concerned with the political climate in that they are not watching so closely what is going on around them politically or what's going on around them politically in the White House. What they are concerned with is stuff that they are concerned with on their day-to-day life. And the fact is, in our day-to-day life, the things that are most important are those women that we are able to connect with. Woman-to-woman mentoring is what I'm hearing women in business and working women talk about all the time. They want to know, how do I get to operate in a more efficient, productive way? And it can be in my home, it can be in the workplace, or it can be in the government sector. All of those things are connected in what it takes to succeed. It takes some good mentoring. It takes hard work. I am reminded of someone told me just the other day, opportunity can be equal, but results are almost never equal. And that's because it does take hard work. So with all that being said, I would like to focus on the woman-to-woman mentoring and what that looks like in the state of Texas. I am so impressed and so happy to hear the women on this panel, because many of them are talking about just that. And business owners across the state of Texas are talking about what it takes to succeed in business. And they, of course, access to capital is what I've already mentioned. Gay has beautifully laid out for us a plan as to one place in the state of Texas where women can actually go and get the practical help that they need. And that's really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about practical help. The Governor's Commission for Women, even as I speak, the wonderful women that I have the privilege of working with are putting together a program also to get funds into the hands of those women that need it most. Those women that are starting their businesses at their kitchen table. Those women that are having difficulty just finding where to go. What kind of regulations do I need to be concerned about? Those kinds of things are the things that business women and women that work in government are concerned about. Some of you know that I've had the privilege of running for office, and one of the things that I found most lacking, besides funding, because of course funds are always important, and I would encourage any woman that's watching this, that's thinking about running for office, one of the things that you are going to have to learn how to do is to humble yourself enough to ask for funds. When someone says that they want to, I want you to run for office, one of the things that you have to follow up with is, can I get a check? But with that being said, the mentoring, having other women that have run for office, senators or members of the House of Representatives, it's important to be able to reach out to those women, and it's important for those women to reach out to us. And I'm going to turn this over to someone else, but I would like to say also, one of the things that I have found that I won't say is disappointing, but one of the things that I would like to see changed in the government sector, women that have held office and been in office for decades, I would love to see those women take the time and make a real effort to reach out to women that are thinking about running for office. It does bother me, and it has bothered me, that so many women that have been in office, that have held those offices, when they get ready to vacate that seat, there should already be a young woman waiting in the rafters that has been groomed by them to take that position. And I'm not saying that. Are you seeing that, Gay?
No, I'm not. And it's an excellent point, Chairwoman Harris. We do need to bring people along. And that's one of the things that, at this point in my career, I am trying to do this to the Women Who Mean Business. That's the name of our program at McCombs, because it is a way to mentor. It is a way to bring other people along. And it's not for me, anymore a success story to say, well, I did this. If I'm not bringing other people and other women along, then my story isn't told. And so you bring up an excellent point. We have got to do this, and each woman needs to dedicate herself to helping other women. And that's how we'll keep people engaged in the workforce and promoted, and and getting the access to capital, getting access to strategies that will help them be successful. So I think it's all incumbent on us, if we've made it to a certain point, how do we give that hand up to somebody else? And I will make one last statement, that this is a bit of a shift in thinking, because maybe I'm the oldest one in the room here, but when I was coming up in my career, there were very few women who were trying to help me. I always laughed and said I have scars on the top of my hands because I was trying to crawl up the ladder, but stiletto heels were hitting me as I was going up. There wasn't a hand up. It was more stepping on your hand. So I do agree that let's all take this on as a challenge to make sure that we are doing things. And I'm proud of what's going on at the LBJ School, your programs around getting women into running for office, giving them the tools, the ideas, the strategies. And so all of these things collectively, hopefully, will start to really move the needle back so that we get our women in the right places and get them in a place to lead, which we need.
Yeah, I agree.
Amy, I just want to say amen. Amen to all of that. I have the pleasure of working very closely with Amy Kroll in doing exactly this, bringing women up into the public forum, into the pipeline of running for office. In my Office of Civic Engagement oversees the Women's Campaign School. And what we know from research, I mean, we all kind of know it intuitively, but we know from research that women elected leaders are more collaborative, and that they also bring issues that are of most relevance to women, to families, because, it's not just a women's issue, it's a family issue. And that, we're sitting around here talking about the She-cession and how do we chart a path forward in terms of reforming our childcare system, enabling women to be better and more effective entrepreneurs. Well, we do that, even though our male friends do have our back. There's nothing like having the voice of the woman at the table. And, we are not where we need to be. Last year, we celebrated the 100th anniversary of women getting universal suffrage. That's all fine and great. But you know what? Across the board, women only make up about 25% of all elected offices, when we make up close to 51% of the population. So there is a huge hole here. And, what Amy and I have been working so hard to do is create that pipeline. And another thing that we're working on, I'll give a little teaser here, it's in the works, is we're trying to figure out how we can fund our women candidates, our Women's Campaign School applicants, to also have childcare. So we're still working on that piece, but I'm hopeful that maybe within the next year or two, we have that. So I think that, in terms of actionables, we're coming together to talk about these issues, but the actionables is encouraging those women in your life who have thought about running for office, or who you think should run for office, or if you want to run for office, to take that step. There are phenomenal resources out there. Obviously, I'm biased, and I think the LBJ Women's Campaign School is where you should go. But I want you all, the royal you, to push women in your lives to step up into the arena, including those in the business world. We need female business leaders at the table to help us figure out how we reform our economy, what is best for the American economy with a family-centered approach.
May I say one thing about one thing quickly to add on to that? There's also the whole movement around women on corporate boards, and I'm involved in several groups that are really trying to push that agenda. And I served on a corporate board, and we had 2 vacancies. There was only one other woman on the whole board with me, but we asked the recruiters, we said, you have to bring us female candidates and diverse candidates for these 2 positions. You cannot bring us the slate of the same white males, to be honest. And we asked for it, and we got it. And so we ended up with a more diverse board because of that. But if we had not asked that question and pushed for it, then it may have gone on as it always had. So again, it's in the boardroom, it's in the public offices, it's in business, it's in the public sector. But again, we have to ask for that. And if you don't stand up for it, then it will be passed over once again. And we need women running boards or being active on boards, because that sets the pace and the tone for policies that run these big companies. So that's another area that we can all be vocal with too.
Well, thank you so much for bringing that up about corporate boards. That is absolutely an important piece of this puzzle as well. I just wanted to add quickly on to Dr. D's point here about mentorship and getting more women into office and the LBJ Women's Campaign School. So in our first cohort, we had a group mentorship component of the program where 5 women would each meet with an elected official, a senior political operative, or a community leader. And that was a really powerful part of our first cohort experience, and actually so powerful that in the second cohort, we are pivoting to have a one-on-one mentorship experience so that every woman in our cohort will have the opportunity to meet with a leader actually 6 times is what they will get. And so they'll get that one-on-one experience of meeting with a leader, asking the questions that she really wants to know. And so it's that individualized attention that I think is really going to help these women grow into leadership roles. And I'm really excited about that opportunity, especially because research shows that when women receive mentorship, they show an 88% productivity increase compared to 24% from training alone. And so really excited to be able to include this mentorship piece in our program. Shauna has let me know that she has something to add on to the question about Biden's Gender Policy Council that he just announced yesterday in this executive order. It's a huge step forward for women in government. And I'd love to hear your perspective on what this means for women in government.
Yes, thanks, Amy. And I just want to build off of the wonderful points that my colleagues have already shared, but really speaking to both an important, what the Gender Policy Council represents, right? So it's both an acknowledgement by this administration that there is an incredible need to focus on the specific experiences of women and gender expansive folks in our policy making. And as we think about the road ahead, that there's an explicit focus on gender equity in our country. But I think what allowed that to be possible is what we've seen as women building power together, realizing their power, demanding representation on corporate boards, mentoring one another, owning businesses, running for office. It's this full recognition that women and the work that women and girls do every day, that LGBTQ folks do every day, that is also embedded and is a thread in the fabric of our economy and our communities. And so this council is a very high level of reporting directly to the president, which is huge, to say we are looking at this. We're looking at women's long-term economic security and what are the things that we can do right now to ensure that family economic security is already so deeply tied to women's economic security that we're paying attention to that. We're looking at caregiving. Caregiving is explicitly named in the executive order. Healthcare and access to a full suite of health resources is part of this. It is recognizing that in a country where so many of the systems that were developed with an explicit focus on the needs of, quite frankly, white men, that now we are acknowledging that in developing those systems, and it's only because those were the people who were in the rooms developing the systems, right? Like the people who are at the table writing the policy are going to write policies that reflect them and their interests and their needs, which is, again, why we need more women of color, folks grounded in community, helping to drive policy making in at all levels in this country, and the tremendous opportunity that something like a White House Council on Gender Policy is going to be able to do at a very global view for the country at like the 40,000 foot level, and also be an example of ways that we can be doing this work at all levels in our states, in our local communities, in our municipalities. So just wanting to offer that as both as you pose the question, just it is an exciting thing to see happen.
Thank you so much, Shauna, for highlighting that. I think actually we're ready to turn to some Q&A. I see we've already got 4 questions in our Q&A function. And so let me start with a question. It looks like this is a question for Gay. It says, regarding women on corporate boards, what is your take on the law in California that mandates women on corporate boards?
Well, I wish we didn't have to mandate. I'm not a really big fan of mandating any of these things. They need to happen because people want them to happen. And I think we have to put more pressure on the individuals who serve on those boards and on those companies to be more diverse. If it takes a mandate, it does, but that's just almost, to me, it doesn't feel right. I would rather it happen because these candidates are qualified and they need to be on these boards, and not just because, oh, we have to fill a role, because that creates animosity sometimes, and it doesn't always create the best environment for bringing in women. When you can show that the woman is absolutely qualified and has every reason to be on the board, then that's something else. It may come to that, but if we could work it organically, I would be happier.
And something that I've seen, just to add on to that, is just that when women are on corporate boards, there's studies that show that those companies actually are more profitable than other companies that have fewer women on their boards. And so it actually benefits the company in a huge way to have more diverse voices on their boards. And so just to add on to that I thought that was so interesting, that actually companies make more money when there are more women in leadership positions. That just blew my mind when I learned that.
That is true. And I will say one other thing real quickly is, you look at a lot of the companies that we are seeking board members for, and their target audience of who buys their products and services are usually women as a majority. And so when you have women voices on the board, they're more willing and to understand perhaps that end user or the end customer. So it's not just, that they're qualified, but sometimes they have a sense of the real sales cycle of the business and who's buying.
And Chairwoman Harris or Shauna, do you have anything to add to this question?
The word that comes to my mind is accountability. In that men and women, if they are on these boards, have to hold each other accountable to making the board a success. In other words, the 10 or 12 people that are seated at the table, rather than, in my opinion, rather than looking to Washington, D.C. or looking to Austin to help them stay in line, so to speak, or to develop policy, it's much better. I think the word that Gay used was organic. It's much better if that change comes from the people sitting at the table. So holding your coworker accountable to making seats and making positions more accessible to women of all colors is the key to this. It is not going to happen unless it happens at that table. I don't care how much legislation is passed. I don't really care in the scheme of things. That is not going to make the real difference. The real difference is going to be made when we start to educate the people that are seated at the table and educate the people that are able to make those decisions. So I would just say that holding each other accountable. If you are a man or a woman listening to this webinar today and you're seated next to other people at the table in your company, and you are not posing hard questions to them, if you are not calling them into account as to, well, we have 5 candidates for this position. Why is this candidate being chosen over this candidate? How is the table being leveled, or I should say the playing field being leveled in order for more people to be able to participate? Those are the things that are important, and that comes in that boardroom, not outside of the boardroom. It comes in the boardroom from the people that are seated at that table. So I'm going to hold you accountable. You hold me accountable. Let's put our heads together and see if we can't make this thing happen. Because if it doesn't happen in the room, it's not going to happen.
And I might offer in a slight contrast to what my colleagues have offered, is that I actually feel that a law is one of the strongest tools of accountability that we have. And one of the key ways in our country and in our society to extend that hand up, because we know that so often in these environments, people can have the best intentions, but unconscious biases, just the ways that things have operated for too long. Change is slow and incremental, and the law is one way that we can ensure that women have equal access to opportunities. I work for an organization called the National Women's Law Center, and our mission is to fight for gender justice, especially for women who are facing multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination. And what we know is, while we talk about things like the gender pay gap, and particularly today is Asian American and Pacific Islander Women's Equal Pay Day, which means that on this day is when an Asian AAPI woman would actually achieve the same compensation as a non-Hispanic white man, meaning that over the course of a lifetime, an AAPI woman would make $400,000 less because of this pay gap. These are things that happen even when we try to have race and gender blind policies. We sometimes have to use the law and policy as a way to account for some of the challenges that manifest when, again, folks with diverse lived experiences, women of color do not have kind of the voice and representation in developing these laws and systems historically. And a lot of what we have is built on those systems where their needs, their experiences, things that affect their lives are not taken account for. And so I actually find the law in California interesting. I'm not deeply familiar with it, so I can't speak to how broadly it goes or how much it directly accomplishes, but I understand the theory behind it, that when left to our own devices, so often our systems go back to the ways that they were founded. And what we do know is that a lot of what has grounded the development of so many of our systems in this country did not account for the lived experiences of women today. And so that's what I would offer.
Thank you so much, Shauna, for bringing up kind of that systemic change and different ways that that systemic change can happen in our society, and how important it is, especially now when we are facing this national crisis, for us to make big changes. So thank you for bringing that up. I have another question here. The question is, I've heard the statistics about women running for office, how they typically have to be approached many times before they make the final leap into running. What kind of support/coaching is necessary to do that? I know that the LBJ Women's Campaign School is focused on this. Ms. Gaddis and Chairwoman Harris, is there a similar phenomenon with regard to women starting a business? Are there more barriers?
Karen, you start with that one. You're right in the middle of it.
Well, I would say they are so close. The thinking is completely parallel. I think we did mention during this webinar that one of the greatest impediments to running and succeeding in office is from a financial standpoint, having the funding. Of course, funding is one of the number one, well, it is the number one thing for entrepreneurs. It's also the number one thing for women that are seeking to run for public office. That's something that you just can't dismiss that. That has to be done. So first of all, access to capital is extremely important. And the other thing is being able to assess the situation that you're in before you decide to make the leap to either run a business or run for office. Now, let me give you an example with that. As far as running for office is concerned, it is extremely important for you to know your audience. If you are wanting to run for public office and you have not studied the district that you are running in, if you only know something about your city, and let's just suppose in my case, when I ran, my district was composed of 12 different counties. And I had to know something about the entire district, not just the county that I was living in. So knowing your audience when you're building a business and knowing your audience when you're running for office, the same. So for those of you that are listening and you are thinking about running for office and you also are in business, you would do well to think about running for office under the same guise as you would if you were starting a business. Some of the same things are absolutely necessary. You have to have funding. You have to know your audience. You have to be bold in what you are going to put forth as far as what you're asking for. You're going to have mentors. Same thing, whether you're running for office or starting a business. There's a tremendous parallel in these things. Wouldn't you agree with that, Gay?
Absolutely. And I have this old phrase that says, know the money. And, in anything that you're doing, if you're in business and you're an entrepreneur, or if you are running for office, you cannot be afraid to ask for the business or ask for the money. And that's where I think sometimes women are held back in some ways because they're perhaps a little unsure or a little maybe afraid in some ways to go out and ask for money. But I would ask people for business. I'd say we'd love to have your account. I'll tell you a real funny story. Many years ago, I went to a new business seminar in Puerto Rico, and the guy taught me one thing. He said, I want to go to anyone that you want to do business with. And if they can't name you as someone that wants to do business with them, then you don't have a new business program. Meaning that maybe that individual or maybe that person isn't ready to hire you right now or to give you the money now, but if they don't know that you want that money or you want that business, then you're not really in action. So we have to be bold enough to, if you're running for office, if you're starting a business, if you're an entrepreneur, or even in business, to be able to go to the money source and have a credible reason why they should support you.
I would add to that, anyone that's interested in running for public office, or if you've made the decision to run for public office, someone has asked you to run for public office, and generally it is not a decision that you personally make. If someone says to you, Gay, I think you should run for office, then the one thing that probably you need to pay attention to is, number one, who is making that statement? And is that person willing to write you a check? Those are the two things that you really need to pay very close attention to. And as we're talking about the money thing, we know that in Texas, 75% of all small businesses owned by women, they started with their own funds. And I would say that anyone that is thinking about running for office, you are going to also have to be willing to make the sacrifice to be all in financially and to be all in from a physical standpoint, because it is hard work. So I would just like to add those two things to that.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman Harris. And Vicki, I'd love to turn it over to you for some final closing thoughts you might have on some of the topics we discussed today, or on this final question.
Thanks, Amy. So I think it's drawing out that very strong parallel and intersection between women in business and women in politics. They are not mutually exclusive realms. We need each other. Sometimes they intersect, you know, when we see women from the business world running for office, or women who've been involved in politics deciding to start up a new business, but they need each other. And I think that this panel is really demonstrative of how we can come together, share best practices, share where we need to go, and chart it out together, because we shouldn't be functioning in isolated silos. Even though McCombs is on one side of campus and LBJ is over here, we should have a lot more dialogue in spaces such as these. So I think those are my concluding thoughts about getting together more in a post-COVID world, actually doing so in person where we can do it over cocktails or cafecitos.
Well, thank you so much, Vicki, and thank you to all of our panelists for joining us today. I want to take a moment here at the end to plug the LBJ Women's Campaign School, because applications are open now and they close on Monday, March 15th. So we're coming up on the deadline here, and you do need a letter of recommendation. So if you want to apply, you'll want to get that request out for a letter of recommendation today. You can go to lbjwcs.org to apply. And we have some fantastic news. For our second cohort, because of grants from our partners at Texas Women's University Center for Women in Politics and Public Policy, Texas residents will actually be able to attend our program with free full tuition, which is very exciting. This is something that is available just to our second cohort. And so you'll want to make sure that you apply now and take advantage of the fact that tuition is now free for Texas residents. Additionally, if you need computer equipment, they will be able to provide computer equipment to you as well. So please go to lbjwcs.org and apply by March 15th. And with that, I want to say another huge thank you to our panelists for joining us today. This recording will be up on YouTube on demand, and so feel free to tune in at a later time. And thank you so much to everyone for joining us today.
Thank you, Amy. Great seeing everyone.
Thank you, Amy.